Alright, so thanks for coming along, everybody. Today I'm going to do another shifter video, and I just want to let you know that I will be finishing up on that non-world class T5 video shortly. These are jobs I actually have in-house that I have to get out, but I figured that what I would do is I would share some of the problems that people have and some of the fixes, so if you might have these same issues, and at least you'll know what to do, right? And so I always have these kind of sheets that people send in with their shifters that are on my website, and they kind of give me a list of things to do. But before I get into this, please subscribe to the channel. All the information about me, how to contact me, is in the video description below. If you enjoy the channel, you feel like you want to contribute to it somehow, there's a buy me a coffee link. You can buy me a cup of coffee virtually, and that would be really cool. All those kind of funds go into buying equipment, gear, anything I need to get videos to you for free. All right. So this video that I'm doing on this shifter, it's a Boss 302 Mustang shifter. It's actually the second one I got this week. These are from 6970. They're original Hurst shifters, the OEM shifters, and you really can't change them around too much. There's no way to change the rods. There's really no way to put stops in these shifters because the linkage arms, the pattern's a little bit different from first to second to third and fourth as far as the lengths. So stops really wouldn't be an advantage putting them in the shifter. You might be able to set them for the 1-2 gate, but then they may not work for the 3-4 gate and vice versa. So this is what the shifter looks like. Let me read the description, what the person sent in here. It says here, when trying to shift into first gear, if you just move the shifter left until it comes against the stiffer reverse spring, it won't go into first gear. It's trying to move the 1-2 and the 3-4 arm plates at the same time. You have to push partially into reverse spring to get into first. There is considerable play around the carriage bolt pivot point as well as the roll pins in the bottom of the shifter where it pulls the large pin side to side. So it kind of sounds like the shifter is well worn. What I noticed, this is an OEM shifter that has these rubber isolators that go inside of it. And the rubber isolators, usually the stick snaps in, but this stick has a fair amount of play back and forth within the isolator. And they tried to put bolts through the piece here. I don't know if you can see these bolts here. And they actually do nothing because the bolts can't compress this housing. It's pretty thick metal. So it's not like you can actually compress the stick and squash things together. Maybe if they put some sort of washers in it, they could do that. But usually when you have this kind of slop like this back and forth, it's because the actual handle itself is worn. And usually what I do is I build them up with some weld so they fit into the receiver really tight and then they don't walk back and forth. Things may have to be welded up in here. I don't know. We'll see what it looks like when I take it apart. The other thing is that this shifter has the rubber grommets and studs, which are all dried out, these grommets, and I replaced these with my own custom designed solid studs to get rid of this nonsense here with the rubber. So let's get to it. Let's take it apart and let's see if what we can find matches the description on this sheet here. Let's go. So these little tiny screws here really don't do much. I think they were thinking they were going to do something, but they really didn't. And you can see here that we have this kind of slop in the shifter, and it's not even making contact with the isolator. The area over here is that what clips into the isolator. So for some reason, it's not either clipping into it, and it's still loose. What will happen is this area on these handles right over here, this little area right over here, will actually get pushed in over time on both sides. You could just see that little ridge there, and that little ridge is enough to make the stick kind of wobble back and forth. So I'll just add a little bit of weld there, file it down, and that should take care of that issue. So the receiver itself, usually sometimes they split where the welds are, but the welds are fine. The receiver may be stretched out a little bit, but it looks like it's in really good shape. So what I'm going to do is just pull out these isolators then. They weren't even in correctly, and they're pretty well shot. So you can get a screwdriver in here and just pop these cross shafts right out. There's that. Everything will drop down. I I know in older videos too I've had a bolt method where I put a bolt here and spread the body apart, but if the body's pretty sloppy like this, you can just stick a screwdriver in here and pry it out like this. Now an attempt obviously to make the shifter tighter, the bridge plate going across was bent. This is a common issue. What we do is I'll put extra shims in here and put a heavy duty bridge plate in it so it doesn't bend. So what we're going to do is take this bridge plate off so we can get the rest of the shifter apart. With the bridge plate off, now I can actually just slide the whole assembly right out. Not bad. None of these gates look really bad. I call these gates, by the way, but they don't look bad. Shims are well worn. Put them there. Let's see what we got here. We can see the problem right away. So if we look here, we could see that this plunger is hanging up here because the washer broke, or maybe it was assembled one time without a washer. I don't know, but that's what's going on here, why the reverse bias is all screwed up. The whole thing is all cocked and crooked and not right. So that's an easy fix. You know, it'll be part of the rebuilding process to get that handled correctly. This spring should not be coming through like this. There should be a washer here. So that's that issue. Let's get the rest of it apart. All right, so what I'm going to do is just push this like this. Try to get it over here. And knock these pins out. We'll look at this plunger later on. Obviously the spring shouldn't have been here like this. Should be in there. So these carriage bolts, what happens is they tend to wear right where it pivots. It just kind of digs into the bolt and eventually gets a little bit sloppy. Well, it was one of the springs that went. So this guy was complaining again about the wear between the pins. It's really not that bad, and it is what it is, but it's not any point in welding this up because it's actually in pretty good shape. There is a little bit play back and forth from this, but considering the age of this from 1969, it's actually in pretty good shape. So we'll clean all this stuff up. Once we clean these parts up, then we'll go look over everything and see what we've got. This is your main selector pin, and the reverse plunger rubs against this selector pin right over here. And you can see that the pin is worn. So anytime the main selector gets worn like this, what will happen is it'll over bias itself. So this, of course, will have to be changed. Let's go see what we got on the plunger now itself. These plungers are very hard and they're usually in pretty good shape. I changed them anyway because you never know when it could fail. But it's actually in good shape. There really is nothing really wrong with it. So, but this cuts into the main selector pin and screws up the left and right bias as well. Usually what I'll do is I'll check to see if this fits okay over this way. In other words, this bore over here is pretty tight. Some of them are really badly egg-shaped and we have to fix these. But basically we'll just change this piece out. But this actually is in really good shape. There is no problem with it that I could see. So we'll reuse these pieces again, but it's actually in pretty tight shape. So we're just going to change this selector as well. So these bodies can wear inside. So what I'm going to do right now is I'm just checking to see what I'm up against, if everything is cool this way. So when you put this, you want to call it this cross shaft in here, back in, what we're doing is we're checking to see that it's not too sloppy in the body. And we see this movement here is very excessive. So the actual body is worn. All right, no matter how much you tighten this, piece, this is going to want to move like this. And it's going to give you the whole shifter. Think about it, when it's extended this long, this whole thing is going to be rocking back and forth. So that's in pretty bad shape. And so what I'm talking about is this here. All right. Now, I got a cool fix for this, and I'll show you what I do. Most of the time, this counterbore is worn towards the back. What I'll do is, I actually have a tool I've made to fit through here and rebore this. And what I'll do is I'll build this up with weld along here and then come in and re-counterbore the whole thing and clean it up so we get a nice tight pin fit again. A lot of these restorations, people want to use the original numbers here, even though they don't really mean much, but they like the original cases. We could swap out the case if we want to, but what I'm going to do here is try to fix this case first. So you can see on these isolators here, they drill these 2 holes through everything, and they actually ruined the isolator spring clip because they drilled right through the spring clip. So that's one of the reasons why the stick just kind of came out and was flopping around. The fix, of course, is to fix the handle properly so it fits in there, and then use brand new isolators that aren't, hardened or anything like that. So we'll take care of that. So let's make a list of what we're going to do. So obviously we're going to clean this whole thing up, get it in the tank, put it through the vibratory polisher, get everything off. We're going to change these 2 one-piece studs. We're going to do a full rebuild kit in it, and then we're going to repair the handle, put a little weld on that, and we're going to repair the body and try to tighten everything up and see where it goes from there. All right, so I got a little bit of a problem here, and I just want to show you one of the issues. Because they put holes in this receiver, they've drilled out the little location bosses that are inside the receiver to hold the isolators in place. So you see the isolator has these 2 little holes in it. Now in a normal receiver, you have these little nubs inside here, all right? And so when the isolator goes in there, it locates on these nubs, so it keeps it from falling down. And that's how that works. And then the clip here fastens to the shifter, right? So the problem is we have nothing here to locate the isolator anymore. It's just going to drop down and not stay in place, and the whole thing can pull the stick right out. So I have 2 choices. I actually have a spare receiver over here that I could use that hasn't been messed with, or I could repair this one. Now the way I would repair this isn't the first time I've seen this happen, but luckily they've drilled it correctly to like a 1/4 inch. I'll take a 1/4 inch dowel and I'll put it in, like say over here, and I'll set it up so I have a nub back. I'll weld the dowel, then grind it flat on the outside and restore the piece that way. I might just do that so that at least I have a spare, because I hate using these things unless I have to. But this is actually not as worn as this one. See, this is kind of worn over here. It's not that bad. And this one is really like in like new condition. So I might just use that instead, but repair this just to show you how I do the repair. All right, so in order to repair that shifter body, what I'll do is I weld up the countersink, then I machine it back down, and in that process, with some filing and everything, get everything nice and square and flat again, so that when I put the new cross shaft in it, it's going to fit perfect, the way I'd like to see it. So this is the final result of it and what it looks like. All right, so what I'll do is I have one of these shims installed over here. These are 12,000 shims that I make. And what I do is I'll counterbore the body deep enough so I can use the shim, and a little bit deeper so that I have some room to play with when I put these shafts in here. So the shaft now can go in here, and then I use a nice flat ground stock, making sure that I have no movement at all. This is what I want. See that? No movement this way either. It's nice and firm now. All right. So what I want to do is I want to measure the squareness of the body now. I want to make sure it's okay. Nothing's tweaked in any way. I got 1.891 on the back side, 1.890. That's pretty good. That's nice and square within a thousandths. That's amazing. So now the body's obviously ready to go, but I'm going to have to put it in the machine and kind of tumble it and get it cleaned up better. All right, so I want to fix this receiver now. And so what I'm going to do is put pins in the holes, weld the pins in, grind them flat, and then once I have these kind of little nubs inside there, that'll be a place for the isolator bushings to hold in place because they were missing before. Then what I'll do is I'll trial fit the stick inside of it to make sure it doesn't move around and it snaps in and out easily. So let me show you what this looks like now before I finish the pin and grind it off. Alright, so I put a couple of tack welds over here to hold the pin in place before I kind of go around and fuse it down into the hole. So once the pin is welded into place, then I'll cut it off with my little cutoff wheel, grind a little flush, and then I'll have two little pieces inside of it. Let's see if I can get this out here. To hold that isolator now. So I built up some weld on the handle to take out some of the slop. Now we'll trial fit the handle to the receiver with the new isolators in place. So this is what I want to show you. I think it's important though you see how these clips, this is the clip and this is the rubber isolator, how they work. So the clips, when they're positioned, you have a semicircular bottom here that goes against the lower pins in the receiver. This prevents that whole setup from being pushed down too far when the handle is pushed into it. The rubber pieces have to match this setup over here. In other words, you see the way you get this little curve here? The rubber has a little bit of a curve in it, and it has to fit in it like this. You don't want to put them in upside down. So they fit in like that. You do the other side too. Fits in like this. There's a little bit of flash from the rubber. Okay, that's okay. Push this in like this. So now when they're together and they're inside the receiver, again, we have the lower pin keeping the whole clip and isolator from being pushed down, and the side pins on either side will prevent the clip and isolators from being pulled up when you remove the stick. If we look at the receiver, you could see what I'm talking about. You have the lower pin over here on the inside, and you have the side pins over here on each side on the inside. And that repair I did, it had lower pins in it, but it didn't have any side pins. So I welded some new pins. I already put this clip and rubber isolator inside of it. It fits perfect. Let's go see how the stick fits in now. I just want to grease the stick up a bit. By the way, on any of these Hurst sticks that have this type of setup that they clip in, the clip portion is always on the driver's side of the stick. So now you have to push these things in pretty hard. It doesn't go in that easy. Don't forget I built some weld up on it, so I'm really going to push this in solid. When it's in the car, once it's in, if you look, I've got no play in it anymore. I'm trying to move it, nothing, and it can't pull out. Okay, that's what we want. See that? Total good shape now, total repair, works perfect. Now I've made my own little tool out of a putty knife that I'll just slide in here. So just so you see what I'm doing is, the putty knife goes in and goes in past here like that, then I lift the handle out. Normally when this is in the car, it's a lot easier because the shifter is bolted to the transmission. All right, so you can see, I got this all assembled now, and I've got that washer below the carrier now. So now the spring will not pop out, and that's the way it should be. Receiver's in, isolators are in, ready to go back together. All right, so I'm ready for the final assembly here, and I just want to show you what I've got going on. So I've got the whole assembly, but I've loosened the bridge plate and rotated it 90 degrees so that it clears the body. Some older shifters, you will not be able to plug in the whole assembly unless the bridge plate is rotated to clear the upper portion of the body over here. So I got my 15 thousandths spacer plate, the reverse gate, the 50 thousandths interlock plate that I manufacture, the 3/4 gate over here, and the 1/2 gate over here. That's how it looks all together. I've got everything greased. Just simply slide it in place like this now. So I put the body on a socket here, and what I'm going to do is just slide this wave plate in here. Usually these older shifters, that's all you need is the wave plate. They go in pretty tight as they are, because the tolerance is so tight on these as it was, and I could tell by just looking at it that when I compress it, I might be able to sneak another 10 thousandths in it. Probably can. This is kind of a trial and error thing. You have to kind of put them all together first, see how they shift. If it feels like it's really binding or it's too tight, you might have to then remove one of these shims. But we'll see how this works. I use an old pivot pin that's tapered so that I can kind of align all the gates, make sure they're okay. This way I can get a clear shot with the new pin. Now remember, before I had measured this pin with the body, I got all my clearances set. So that's good to go. I can't wait to see how this shifts. All right, so I got the shifter all mounted, ready to go. Now I'm going to just test out a few things. I want to make sure that the clearances are correct, that it's not binding in any way, and that I dialed in my proper clearances. So I put my 50 thousandths spacer plate in, or they call it interlock plate, and I put a 10 thousandths plate between the wave plate and the main case. I usually always put that 10 thousandths plate in because most of these shifters that are over 50 years old are going to have some sort of wear, and that kind of compensates for it. So now I'll take a feeler gauge. I'm shooting for 25 thousandths. There's 25 thousandths gauge in here. It's a perfect fit, nice and tight, the way I like it. Now, what I'm going to do is I got this handle I'm going to put in here. This handle I've welded up so it doesn't clip in. So I can put it in there and just test the action out. Got good action that way. Feels good. Reverse is good. Snaps back. So we've got the shifter nice and tight now, ready to go. Just one more thing. So here's my last trick that I do on these Ford units. One thing that I really didn't like about the OEM Ford shifters is that they have a stud for the adjustment of the rod. So the rod slides along a little stud here like this. It's got a little rectangular slot to rod, and you lock it in with a jam nut. But these bushings are always sloppy on them. They're never tight, so that adds to a lot of movement of the rod within the gate itself. So what I've done is I've eliminated all these things and made a solid one-piece stud that goes in here, and then you hold it together with one of these simple D-clips like you do on the regular newer shifters. So you eliminate that slop. So these rubber grommets also, they get hard over a period of time. There are newer grommets that you can get that are a little bit more difficult to put in. These are these nylon grommets. They're a lot more rigid. So again, they're very problematic to get in there, but when you do put them in, the stud will not move at all in them. But again, it could pop out, it could crack. So I eliminate it completely and just use this piece here. And then you have a serrated nut that just goes on it like that. So I'll just grease these bores. Now, keep in mind that a lot of the OEM shifters were metal to metal to begin with. So sometimes they had just isolators on the shifter arms and nothing on the shifter. Most of the Mopar shifters are direct metal to metal. So kind of overkill what Ford did. I understand they're looking for a certain shift feel, but in general, it's not what I would do. See, these snap in like this now. I'll put in this clip, this way you get an idea. So what do you think? I think that shifter came out pretty nice. That Super 661 rebuild, huh? With my little stud upgrades and everything. But this brings me to an interesting point. Oftentimes people will contact me and say, can you just freshen up something, or can you just go through something? And those terms alone just kind of mean, like, to me, that it's almost like you want a rush job, or you just want me to freshen it up, like it just doesn't really need much, you know, just go through it really quick. It's not a cocktail that you can just add some more ice to it, or it's not some sort of mechanical deodorant that you could spray on it and it just smells better and works better immediately. Most of the transmissions we're working on and the shifters that we're working on are over 50 years old. And so in 50 years, a lot of things can happen. You know, rust can set in, fatigue, metal fatigue, abuse, and so forth. So why I like doing these shifter videos is because Hurst throughout the years never really defined as far as what should be and what shouldn't be in terms of measurements. It was up to me to kind of figure out what I thought worked better in terms of clearances and how they should be set up. And I would gather that in the early days in the 60s, when I look back at what was going on, there were all sorts of different variable shims and all sorts of different variable cross shaft sizes, probably because we didn't have, or I should say they didn't have back then, the accuracy that we have today, that we can reproduce a part within a few thousandths of an inch easily with no problem. So, and no matter where it's made, it can be done like that. So I think that back then they were more at a disadvantage because they had to measure things, but still I believe that they still had to come up with an overall good clearance for something. In other words, how it should really be set up. And so when I started looking at these shifters, that's what I figured out on my own. I figured, okay, this is where it's kind of got to be. This is where it's kind of got to set up. And that's how I do them now. And it was all through my trial and error to kind of figure out these dimensions that work well. And so far, or the hundreds of shifters that I built for people that are getting slammed every day, I think I did a pretty good job on that. I haven't seen any issues at all with any of the work that I've done as far as it being off any, you know. Now, when we're dealing with OEM shifters such as this one, where you have isolators and where you have the studs, you want to try to improve on it a bit, because back then they were more interested in possibly you know, the feel of it, the cushioning effect of it. They didn't want vibrations to come through handles and all of that stuff. But most of these cars are pretty loud and pretty rough as it is. And so eliminating these three little grommets here, these little bushings here that I had over here, is not going to make that much of a big deal when it comes to how it feels in the stick, because you still got the isolators, but it's going to give you a better response and a better feel, which to me is very important. And when you're in that car and you're actually going through the gears, that's all you're thinking about really, is how well it feels and how smooth it feels, right? So that's it. I hope you really enjoyed this video. Please subscribe to the channel. I'll see you shortly. Coming up next is the final video on the non-world class T5. I know you guys have been waiting for it. So again, thanks again. See you soon.